Good evening, welcome. Sorry for the slight delay printing out text translations. I'm very happy and honored to be able to welcome our two speakers tonight. Elio Montanari, whose exhibition is on throughout the building. It's titled One, No One and 100,000, and you can see his photographs on levels 1, 2 and 3 and also on the -1 gallery. And tonight he'll be in conversation with Katherine David. I'm very honored to be able to present her as our guest tonight. Katherine David was a curator at the Centre Paume'da from 1982 to 1990, and at the Galerie Nationale de Jeux de Paume from 1990 to 1994. From 1994 to 1997, she served as artistic director for Documenta 10 in Kassel in Germany, and in 2008 she was awarded the CCS Bart Award for Curatorial Excellence. Katherine and Elio met for the first time in 1994 when she was a curator at the Galerie Nationale de Jeux de Paume in Paris. And Montanari was there. He was photographing Pier Paolo Calzolari'yi, installing his work. And you can see these photographs upstairs on the third floor. And also there's a slideshow here of 3 exhibitions by Pier Paolo Calzolari'yi at Jeux de Paume, at Castello di Rivoli at the same year, and also in Venice. So the proceedings, Elio will start with a text about his practice and approach to photography, and then we will continue with a conversation. Thank you.
So now, thank you, Katherine, for your presence here, and for sure for stimulating and inspiring contribution later. So I thank Vasif Kortun and November Painter for their personal interests in my archive, and in particular November for her sensitive advice over the course of the work. I am grateful to both for having attributed aesthetic value to images produced with the aim of documenting the material work of the artist. This is work driven mainly by the ambition to introduce new territory to the attention of the contemporary history of art. And thank you all for your presence here, and thanks in advance for your indulgence and your patience in following my words. In attempting to coordinate my thoughts about the photographic, I have collected a series of annotation and notes accumulated over time, which I have rewritten in different forms, so that my attempt will follow a certain sequence without worrying too much about logical disconnects. They are not new topics, but I think that there is still something to say about them. My other early choice consisted in rejecting short accounts, such as brief outline of photography's relation to the new technologies, which might run the risk of raising complicated questions that really deserve a study of their own. For that reason, I will stick to ideas related to chemical photography, which is often incorrectly called analogic photography. It must be also said that in order not to talk about one's own work, but rather to depart from it, is a complicated matter because of the expressive conflict that arises between autobiographical anecdotes and the objectivity of the historian, between language of myth and the language of science, between story and historiography. By the way, let me recall here a remark by Stan Brakhage that gave me much comfort back when achieving unity of art was the principal aim of artists, together with creating interdisciplinary relations among various languages of expression on the cusp of a culture about to be massified. Brakhage said something like this: I look for a pure photographic form which does not in any way depend on the imitation of figurative art, nor on the demagogic use of the camera as an eye, and certainly not as a glass eye. Stan Brakhage, together with Kenneth Anger and Gregory Markopoulos, was a filmmaker of the new American cinema, a movement conceived in the early 60s by Jonas Makers, who later became the founder and director of the Cinematheque on 3rd Avenue, Manhattan, New York City. Opinions, like poetry manifestos, may be stimulating and sometimes enlightening, but may also generate a multiplicity of interpretations, all equally bright and legitimate, but to go into these would bring us to the open sea on a boat without a compass. Therefore, I prefer positions founded on scientific principles and will try to formulate reflections based on sure data in speaking of the photographic and its neighboring territories, rather than use the term photography in a manner detached from its own territory. By the way, I am deeply convinced that those who know only about photography know nothing about photography. So then, if here or there I refer to the spectrum of the human sciences, it is simply because they represent the loves I've been frequenting now for many years. By this, I mean archaeology, philosophy, aesthetics, linguistics, semiology, anthropology, sociology, history, microhistory, art history, and architecture. I noticed that philology, for example, perhaps more directly than other disciplines, reveals formal and practical affinities with the photographic, often presenting the possibility of analogic transpositions and the adoption of methodology. As a historical discipline, philology incurs a core contradiction. On the one hand, it is a reconstruction of the past, introducing a distance between observer and observed. While on the other hand, it proposes or reproposes the presence of the object. This last observation leads to another one pertaining to the photographic, namely that the photography we admire presents the object of which it has become the image, but that does not mean that it represents it. The photographic object's behavior is not then that of the icon, and it cannot assume iconic values. Those of you who have visited the exhibition have certainly noticed in the hall a line written in gold, taken from Ezra Pound's Pisan Cantos. The line, while posing a rhetorical question on education, tells us indirectly that we stand before a number of documents, and it sees in the document the one way to acquire knowledge. As my title implies, on the documentary nature of the photographic object, this is the title, our purpose here is to examine the relation between the photographic object and the document. The term document, when related to photography, usually takes on negative connotations because one reckons the value of documents as negligible compared to that of photography as an expressive language. The ease of production of photographic images by whoever, officials, amateur, tourists, anybody, and an over-familiarity with photography as a medium of communications seem to have hindered the reflection on the documentary nature of photographic objects. We should also not forget the complicity of postmodern thought in conflating derealization with emancipation. And nor should we underestimate the fact that in the West, from Descartes onward, images have been considered entities inferior to concepts, that is, phenomena eminently mental. Still, in recent years, in public as well as private archives, the interest has intensified, and this increasing interest in archival collections of strong singularity and subjectivity has led to greater appreciation of the photographic document as a cultural good. Unfortunately, despite the evidence of the documentary capabilities of the photographic image, it is still an uncommon source for the historian. The primary reason why the object photo constitutes reliable documentary proof lies in the specificity of the ratio whereby the photographic image is linked to the concrete reality of which it is the referent. I think we should recall once more simply the scientific analysis at the base of the structure of photography. I mean the action of light on photosensitive substances. This is the principle that generates every single photography's chemical process. Building on that scientific basis, the pragmatic realism of Charles Sanders Peirce's semiotics comes to our aid. Following Peirce, we may say that photography assumes an indexical value, for the science is not simply a sign any longer. It brings with it the actual traces left by the referent, and thus it becomes what Peirce calls an index. One consequence of that fertile theory is the inscription of photographic object in the plastic orbit rather than the pictorial. Katherine remembers certainly that if I were remembering 1990, the bakers at the Biennale of Venice, they won the prize of sculpture. So photography is essentially writing with light, even to the extent that the photographic object, formed by the image and its background, is often understood as a text. The term goes back to structural linguistics and anthropological structuralism, both of which promoted on a large scale the vocabulary of linguistics. Here at SALT, the curatorial intentions, with such connotations proceeding from the notions of text and the assumptions of certain philological principles, were to denote, as far as possible, an effect or frame in which the images included in the show should look like the unfolded pages of a book, to use a figural language. We know that a text gives rise to a multiplicity of other texts, ordinary, artistic, simple, complex, of different types, genders, and photographic styles. When the term text mutates from philology, it affects a semantic shift from structural linguistics to philology as text critic, text critical, or ekdotic. Therefore, the single image, considered as a lesson, as from philology, is abstracted from reality, the only real text, as a witness to the reconstructions or constructions of a book, not lost forever in our case, but like an archetype still to be written in its temporarily definitive form. Actually, the entirety of these images may be considered as a book archive or a family album, the family of art, that is not a mere container of images, but a place of emotions, of surprises, as our experiences during the archival work for this occasion will bear out, surprises that is linked to the discovery and interpretation of dramatic story as well as of historiography, as we choose one work and discarded another. Making a choice is a more or less conscious act of exclusion and inclusion. So, to read art history means to set up a theory. In the management of a general archive, the material stock of documents offers itself to arrangement as works of art, which can open up a field of study not only of the work of art tout court, but of the historical and critical consciousness behind the work as an handmade production. A critical consciousness acquired through patient historical research, oriented not to interpret data, but to illuminate a reality in relation to its contradictions and its problematic nature, is crucial in this endeavor. Every work of art has its own specific meaning. To investigate it, one must arrive at a method that reveals the mechanism of its technical formations and those values that history in time has imposed. but with the institutions of model scarcely permeable to contributing to the human science as a whole, being products of the industrial and post-industrial capitalism currently in vogue, we see that the disciplinary imperialism, which I also call despotism of form, has asserted itself and has loosed the handmaid from the nexus of social, cultural, economic relations active in its determinate historical space. In the sphere of material culture, we are witnessing a progressive eclipse of art history. Art history has developed relations with several branches of the humanities, but a reliance on philosophy that produced an over-subtle speculation, expressions about aesthetic matters, soon showed the signs of aging. I do not disregard theoretical reflection, but I believe that we cannot truly understand concepts if we do not apply them to empirical materials, nor adapt them in their original form to the rich determinism of sources and documents. Visitors of this exhibition must have certainly realized from the first moment that here the work of art is caught at the state of birth in statu nascenti. What is caught is the coming to light of the work of art, the appearance of beauty, so to say. This is not only a way of orienting the gaze and the feeling toward aspects habitually neglected, but I have tried to use it as a method of investigation. Essentially, what is operating in the work of art is the work itself, for the simple reason that a successful work depends on the formation process, on those acts that have generated it. The work of art and the process from which it springs are one and the same. It is known that whoever turns to the study of origins intending to find the truth risks falling into dogma position if he does not position the material work of production at the very center of the inquiry. When the work is central, it asserts its own egocentrism over the egoism of its author. If this weren't so, the authorial ego would deceive the author himself, surrendering to the illusion of easy riches, of fame and immortality, to fail to see that the work alone is capable of challenging time would be a dangerous mistake. Then, developing the thread of the discourse, I shall recall the examples of the pencil of nature produced by Henry Fox Talbot. Is evidence of how nature is the artificer of her own image. Talbot informs us that images are made by the camera and not with the camera. Within the situation deliberately arranged, we see how nature spontaneously discovers the conditions necessary to realize her own narcissism. There is also another way, the way of reading which sees the photographic object as the result of the convergence of different skills and functions, such as those practiced in the darkroom and elsewhere. In any case, that the photographer is an artificer is obvious, but not so much for the reproduction or production of the document as for the translation into photographic language, a visual language, which works with metaphors, the metaphors of vision. What does it mean to be translated into a language with a structure that articulates itself in a way totally different from the word? One translates the nexus, the vinculum, that which binds, that which belongs to the meaning that it is linked to, as the shadow is linked to the body. Here it is the case of the centrality of the work of artists at work, of the world of constructions, because the artist is a builder of images. In my own photographic work, which is meant to be a productive effort of different content, what is announced is the latent beauty of the actions, of the material work, which shapes the character particular to the work itself. In these images, there is nothing that speaks of eternity, only of natural laws able to challenge time. Here, on this side of the world, one doesn't exalt the chastity of beauty. Nevertheless, if one happens to be assaulted by wonder, it would arise from the awareness of the simple fact that beauty can be imagined, that is, can be put into image. Just there, where the wool seems to appear in the passage, in the becoming other. Because in the photographic images I have produced, the being of an instant is not stopped, but within the perspective of a space built in a fraction of a second, it happens sometimes that the passage is caught. There comes to be evoked a duration, a sense of duration, a moment devoted to its own disappearance, its decomposition. It emerges as an ephemeral bearing of the things of the world. A melancholic tonality overwhelms and unfolds the spirit of caducity, of a completed nihilism. What becomes image then is what comes forward in the light of consciousness, and what goes away, the going back into the dark of hiding, which is the fundamental bearing of the event that is life itself. It is life which becomes image, in fact. The images that so tired the imagination of philosophers, those incorporeal forms, always in unstable balance between being and nothingness, suspended between presence and absence, touch the senses, sight, sound, smell, when they exist, but as images, they are deprived of their material substance, that of which they are the referent, that of which they present the form and the semblance. Photography, by virtue of that obtuseness with which it is related to real, at least as I understand it, is nothing less than the documentary testimony of that space which separates reality, or what we mean by that term, from its own image, with which it shares the same ontological status. In that interval, in that void, in that nothing, there is something which becomes image, which makes the image to be. Nevertheless, it is a nothing precisely determinate, indeed. It is absolutely determinate because it is what allows the vision itself. Within this dialectic between determinate and latent appears the vanitas of the signs, out of which the image is constituted and constructed. That very same vanitas is what destroyed Narcissus. Narcissus wanted to know himself. He found out that to know oneself means knowing nothing other than reflection, phantasma in Greek and imago in Latin. For Alberti, the Italian architect of the 15th centuries, whose aristocratic historicity permeated the entire humanistic period, Narcissus is the true discoverer of painting, not because he discovered the perfect imitation of its own image and felt in love with it, but because he recognized himself as nothing other than image. It was this knowledge that destroyed him. So the photographic image reproducing the image of the world in conformity with the reflected thing as a reflection, always bring with it a little melancholy. Not so much out of nostalgia for something that exists no longer or the past passed forever, but rather out of the feeling for the caducity of the things of this world. It is a feeling stemming from the awareness that everything which falls within the domain of vision is appointed to die. But now, how can we not mention Roland Barthes, who saw in the photographic document a reassuring strength because it reassures us that the object we see in it has really been there. It is the heuristic or conditional form of the photographic image. For him, it has been there. That is a comfort. Now I would like to close in a symmetrical way without expatiating further, to leave time for discussion. I will restrict our field of reflection to the term conservation without touching on the moral aspect of it. Let's start from a simple consideration then. On what does one exercise interventions of the conserving kind? The term carries the meaning of preservation, even if, to most people, its technical practical implication remain unknown. In our case, what we assume as the object of conservation is photography. It may seem banal, but with this we pose a crucial question. What is photography? More precisely, what in particular does the term photography include? The image? The work as an object? Which one should we be interested in for the purposes of cataloging? In fact, very often, too often, I may say, the material aspect of photography becomes secondary to what is presented in it, that is, the image. We are obliged to recognize that ambivalence. Regarding the semantic values connected to the photographic image, which a large range of historical critical literatures has emphasized, we think of Walter Benjamin, Roland Barthes, Rosalind Krauss, and others, just to mention the most influential, there is what I would call a moral duty towards the photographic document. I hope that in the not too distant future, it will be better understood as a material object and be brought within the orbit of conservative effort designed to safeguard our patrimony of material culture for studying and critical reflections, because we certainly need other people's intelligence. I mean this in the same way that an archaeological find merits attention. Archaeology is a word that, like archive, shared the root of the Greek verb archesthai, which means to begin, to start, and of the verb archomai, meaning to give an order, from which descend archeion, meaning the palace in which documents are contained. Thus, the term archive incorporates the meaning of the verb archein, meaning to keep, to preserve. Archive, then, designate a place where documents are kept. Moreover, it reminds us that it is an important matter for the police. Not police, for the police. And I stop here. Thank you very much.
So it's not very easy after this very philosophical and meditative approach of photography in general and photography by Elio Montanari to maybe to come closer to very one segment of his production, which is the one he decided for a certain number of reasons, maybe he will tell us, to show here, which are the photographs he took from with a certain number of artists who were active, and some are still active. Let's say between the extreme end of the 60s until the late 80s. And these documents are constituting a very interesting and a very specific corpus. you use very precise words, so I'm trying to be precise too. So a corpus which might be of specific interest today, and a certain number of photographies. I don't know for those at least who had the opportunity to see the exhibition before the discussion tonight, the presentation. It seems to me that many of these images are like documents of a moment which is over. A certain way of practicing art, a certain way of installing, a certain way of at least between the artist and the photographers to work together. And it seems to me that what is appearing in the images and between the images is a certain moment of recent art practices which are over, either because artists are working differently, and this is maybe not true because you still have a lot of activities, many gestures, many material movements which are still possible to capture, but which what seems to me very far from us now is a certain freedom, a certain kind of openness in the experiments, and an extreme complicity between the artist and the photographer, so that, for speaking maybe brutally, the photographer is not there at the very last moment or just for taking a picture which will be attractive, which will be eventually a little bit acid, or which will be anecdotal, but the photographer is there most of the time, and it's of course very obvious in the case of long complicity, friendship, and collaborations with Pier Paolo Calzolariyi or James Lee Bayers and a few other artists. Something which is again closer to collaboration and completely cooperation in case, and I don't know if we have images here, in case of the very early performances by Pier Paolo Calzolariyi, which were discussed, organized, and really realized, completed in complete osmosis, cooperation with the photographer. So maybe this is my reading, and maybe Elio won't agree, but I'm not saying that his images are démodé. I'm not saying that, but it seems to me, and I'm not yet 80 years old, and it seems to me that a certain kind of atmosphere, a certain kind of behaving, a certain kind of working is from another time. Of course, we could refer to many elements which there is nothing magical in that. It has also to do with different organization of visibility, another organization of the museums, another economy of art, another way of circulating objects and activities and so on and so forth. And it seems to me that if we were doing what you in a way ask for, meaning serious art historical reading of the images, I'm quite sure that when people would take very carefully your images, if we would stay with this generation of artists, your images, and if we stay in Italy, images by Paolo Mustat Sartore or by Pelion di Persano. If we go a little bit outside, Ari Shunk, and Ari Shunk, I think it begins within the 50s, and we would compare with a certain corpus of photographies which were taken in the last 10 years, we would see not only different expressions, and it's absolutely understandable and desirable that artists are expressing themselves in different ways according to different aesthetical, social, political moments. But I would say also differently in terms of the process and how things are happening, and a certain kind of relationship to materiality, to time, and to visibility. would you
I agree.
go?
I just agree.
So it's one thing, you know, when you would go to more recent the actuality, you know, when Walter de Maria passed away, it happened that I worked with him. It was my first exhibition when I arrived in Pompidou, in Musée National d'Art Moderne. Not that I was a curator. I have to say that as a young curator, I arrived 81. I had no clue who was Walter de Maria, and a colleague was in charge of the exhibition. Walter didn't. It didn't work well, and with this curator, and I was asked to take care of the exhibition. And when I thought about, he passed away a few weeks ago, and what's left? Of course, a certain number of major works, but also a certain number of images which are absolutely idiosyncratic to Walter de Maria moment, way of thinking, way of doing, and which are for a certain number of historical but also economical reasons. And in that case, not only market economy, but also the economy of his work, the way, we were discussing the other day, and I was telling Elio, for me, is something of the Glenn Gould of minimal art, even if I'm sure that what he was doing was not minimal art, but this would be another discussion. But when you think twice, most of the meaning of Walter de Maria work is these days conveyed through photography and through a very specific kind of archiving, a very specific kind of taking care of the works, which is the remarkable work by the Art Foundation in New York, who is still keeping the Broken Kilometer and the Earth Room. So it could take us very far to discuss, for instance, for these many works which were produced between the late 50s and the early 80s, maybe late 70s would be more precise. Now, the more the time is passing, the more we see that we can't really think precisely, subtly about the works without looking at this corpus of photographies which have been taken under a certain number of conditions. I'm not saying rules, because they were not really rules, apart when it had to do with very specific project or artists who had very strict rules for the photographers, for the way they would not appear in the photography. We commented before on Gino de Domenici.
Yes.
It was very clear. He didn't want to appear in photography unless his presence in the photography would be related to a very specific work and then document the work. But I think it's absolutely clear these days that this very specific complex corpus of artists' photographies, or the photographies of the works taken by photographers under certain conditions at that time, are absolutely key to the understanding and interpretation of the works. Of course, you could tell us that it happened before. You have many photographies of Picasso and even much earlier in the century. But what I mean is this kind of extreme complicity, which is in a way participating to the not necessarily to the making, unless again the photography is part of the work, but which is participating to a certain kind of interpretation in the making of the works.
Sharing thoughts.
Exact.
It's the example of the relations I had with James Lee Byers, who was an artist that certainly didn't work with his hands. But he was creative. He was a creative person. He was creative 24 hours a day. So the relationship with him was always a relation, tense and intense, trying to understand the moment in which the photographs should be taken. I remember when Michael Werner called me, because a year after his death, James Lee death, for an exhibition in Madrid, he called me and asked images of, certainly you have several actions and performances about him. And because he knew that our relationship was so daily regulated, that of course I, wearing all the time my camera, I could take pictures when I decided to take a picture or when James Lee wanted me to take a picture. So, yeah. So the relationship between the photographer and the artist requires an understanding higher in relation to the abstraction of his elaboration. I mean, it is James Lee Byers is considered a conceptual artist, a performing conceptual artist.
It's almost difficult to deal with labels, but I think
yes,
but all of that and eventually a few more.
I never saw him manipulating like Pier Paolo Calzolari'yi does with machines and or other artists they do. So. So the relations with an artist of the kind of James Lee Byers requires a constant presence. It's not like, as you mentioned, Gino De Dominicis, he had an idea to realize a work and then he would have asked to a photographer to come there in that very moment, in that very place, to shoot images that they would have been taken into a consideration of an artwork. So I never had, or very seldom, a precise moment to operate with James Lee Byers and people like this. Yeah.
But I think it's something which is extremely visible in your images. That there is a relationship to time, that time is passing, and that you might take or not take a photography, and sometimes the process is going on a very long term. But what it means also is that in this moment, you had a very different way of entering an artist space, whether it would be the studio, whether it would be the living space that you would follow up, and it had nothing to do with an anecdotal picture, or
yes.
Because you told me, and it's something I didn't know. So you learn each day that you also worked with the Pink Floyds and the Rolling Stones, so really pop stars. And I think that in the time you began to take pictures, it's also something which makes a difference between, let's say, the late 60s and the late 70s. You did have very famous artists. You did have a few icons like Andy Warhol, but you had very few people you could really identify like pop stars, and even less, how do we call them now? I also forget. This VIP people you see in magazines and exact. And I think it's really, it was a very different way of proceeding. Not that you didn't have a few artists as, more tempted by heroical attitudes or movements, but it was not the dominant. And what you would do these days is maybe, if not impossible, much as possible these days, because again, the acceleration, the specialization of the works of the photographer, of the artist, the image strategies are absolutely different from what it were at that time. At that time, you had not image strategy, if I may speak.
Exactly. I'm thinking Matthew Barney came in my mind now. How could take pictures of Matthew Barney? So at the end, since photography is a practice, I think that photography can be reassumed as you just push a button. And I didn't do nothing with Matthew Barney. Actually, he didn't want me to take a picture of him while he was working because he was taking the record of what he was doing by himself. So I started taking pictures of him outside, carrying objects or riding bicycles or simply walking, since one day he just asked me to be present in that very evening because something would have happened. And I went there and I didn't know. Then I saw what was happening, and all what I had to do, not really to understand what he was doing, because for me it was just impossible to permeate his work. I didn't understand nothing because I didn't know nothing about his work, but I found myself within a space and with a camera, and I pushed the button. Anytime the images were referred to history of photography, because history of photography gave me the principle of aesthetics. So all what I followed was just a principle of aesthetics, just being there and looking at images. So what I want to say is that it's not so necessary to understand what's going on in front of you. Just look at it. And I mean, I think it's also a very emotional practice, apart from technical. I mean, if technique, because we know that technique cannot talk or find in the essential is objective. It's not essentiality the objective of technique. So just push a button. That's what. You don't really need to have a close relationship with artists, at least with Matthew Barney. After when we started knowing each other, and I thanked him very much for the great gift he gave me, then we became we may say friends, because we all the time when we met, we just spent a few time together. But I didn't know him, I didn't know his work, and I was just there and taking pictures of what he was doing. So I don't know, you know what, now it's so, everything appears to me so dematerialized. That's why I'm wishing to go back to reality in order to be able to take pictures again, because camera is really stupid.
No, so now you're inviting me, because I didn't want to. I'm, in a way, going back to the same kind of question, but from another angle. Yeah. And your last sentence is inviting me in a way. My question would be now, when, and for those who saw the exhibition, it's quite clear that you have very few images of artists who became really active and visible after the mid-80s, let's say. So is it because you are less interested? Is it because the conditions are so different that for you it's not as interesting, not as challenging as it were?
So when November and I went through the archive, we just had to make a conscious or unconscious selection of topics, arguments, or simply of, how do you call them, folders. You know, there are a lot of books. And so we, I don't know why really, but we didn't choose, as I said, it's a matter of inclusion or exclusion. We excluded the not knowing it happened, all the 90s and the end of the 90s, in the sense of the evolution of the technique and the contents of the artwork. I remember when I started running and crossing black spaces with nothing inside, or white spaces with nothing inside. And after a while, seeing artists, or I didn't know them, but people generally dressed in black and sitting on the floor with machines, with tools like computers or other devices. And then there was, of course I took some images, but not of the work of art, because the work of art was already done. And then also for them was enough to push a button and you could see on the screen all what they did before. So it was pointless for me to take pictures, I think. And so I started to feel bad because I couldn't enjoy anymore the relations with artists.
So you know, it's not just your sensibility and November sensibility. It has to do with changes with facts, you know. And as curators, I mean, the colleagues who are in the room, myself, we are very aware that you know, it's very rare these days when you have a long installation to have the artist all the time, and what you see often is a big part of your team, the team from the museum, plus technicians, assistants, but it's very rare. And there is something which really kept my attention when I visited the exhibition, because it's an artist I worked with and I have a lot of respect and friendship for, with Reinhard Mucha. And Reinhard, you have one image of him with his son when he was a long time ago.
More than one, but you saw one, yeah.
In one, and,
yeah,
in this, and it's quite interesting, but in this case, it's one that example of installations which are extremely, you know, you have movement, it's you have action, and Reinhard is there and very often very active in his installations. But for me, would be one of the very few from the younger generations, even if it's not the chicken of the day. Reinhard is a generation from the.
Is he about 50s now,
yeah,
right?
60.
60s.
And but you know, is from still really working, using with a lot of. Sensibility, with pleasure, very different ranges of materials, and really installing in a big size works. And so maybe it's in the archive, but in the exhibition it's
well, I met him 2-3 times, and in Documenta I met him in Venice 2 times, in Documenta 1 time, and somewhere else I don't remember now where. But yes, I followed his work. Yes, I followed his work when I met him, of course. He doesn't like much, actually.
No, I was for saying I could
yes.
also understand, because it's not necessarily accepted
yes.
by him that you,
yes.
not me, because I'm so bad that he won't even care.
No, but he allowed me. He allowed. You know why? Because I remember the first time I took I think that you saw the first photograph I took of him. He was with his daughter.
Yes,
right. And so immediately my activity was connotated by familiarity, because I took a picture of a father with a daughter. I didn't take a picture of an artist. So the images are without the mask of the role. This is and he understood that, and I was happily surprised by the fact that Mucho could understand that and allowed me always to take pictures. Because the most difficult thing is that, you know, when somebody you do not know and he is asking you something really very private, the artists, they don't really you don't have to be an artist to keep that person out of your private circle. But this was the most difficult thing, but it was not difficult for me. I don't know why. They always accepted me. in very, very few cases, like Gino De Dominicis or somebody else, but then I took images of Gino De Dominicis. But because it's impossible to stop a photographer when a photographer wants to take a picture. I mean, you just push a button and you take a picture, you know. There is no way. There is something which overcomes you, you know. You cannot stop. It's a kind of instinct. An artificial instinct, you see, it's just something like that. Even the police cannot stop me. No, they cannot. No, they cannot, because then they are gentle usually, and then they say you should ask the permission. Okay, and I say, okay, where should I go to find the permission? And then I get the permission. So I mean, this is familiarity. So let's say, if you have a camera without film, you find door open. That's why we say that photography is a medium of communications, because you don't need to have a film inside, and you communicate with people just because they see you with a camera. And then camera is a kind of passepartout. I don't know if it is a narcissistic thing of human nature, but certainly of human mind. Human nature, I don't know, but human mind, maybe, I don't know if I open...
But maybe we can, because we took some delay. I mean, I would have many other things, but it would be more, you know, reflexive, and because I think you confirmed what I felt when I saw the exhibition, that, you know, if there are so few images from after the 80s, it says a lot about the changes in the production, and the changes in the condition, what is no more, what is over visible and what is no more visible. And I think it's one more reason for paying, as you were coming to at the end of your lecture, one more reason for paying attention to these archives, which are more and more not something you have to oppose or to the works itself, but, you know, with the passing of time, which are more and more valuable and interesting when we want to keep not only the objects, but the ideas, the moment behind. And of course, it's eventually a question of archive, but it's also sometimes bordering ideological questions, when you know that many institutions today are more inclined, more interested in showing big shots and having a lot of things going on the walls in a very visible and active way, and not necessarily interested in showing documents. You could have it presented in many inventive and pleasurable ways for the audience. But you know, as the curator, you have to fight when you want to put the focus on all what was accompanying, and sometimes what was part of the idea of the concept of the event, of the practice. So of course it's not only a question of, it's very important, it's key to preserve materially the images, the documents as archive, but archives are there for making history, archives are there for being shown. And of course, these days, it's absolutely, from my point of view at least, extremely important to keep the memory of the works, the memory of the artist, the memory of a certain range of attitudes. And it's, of course, the place, this corpus of images from after we could go back to the 50s, because I think it could be integrated now, but from the 50s till the late 70s, it's absolutely part of not only the collections, of course it's part now, but it's a part of the body of the work, especially when somebody's disintegrating, you know, when you want to deal with a Weiser, a certain range of works by a Weiser these days, when you don't really work with the images which were taken with her in the studio, where she was paying a lot of attention to the way she was working, what she was moving with her hands. You give a very restricted view of Eva Hesser, and you transform her in a very dry, minimal artist. When I think she was, and I'm always saying that under the control of one of her best friends. For me, she was an extremely an artist who was using forms and geometry with a certain range of emotions, and of course the opposite of the idea of what is a minimalist artist. So I really think that images, in her case, are extremely important in order to convey the complexity of the process and the complexity of the thinking about the work. And she's a very one example between many others. So I think that for many reasons, it's not a glamorous, maybe not a key issue for market interest or high visibility interest, but it's a key question if we want to go on dealing with the, as you did for photography, the meaning of the works, what is it about, what is it transmitting, and not only what object it is. So I think it's a very deep question, this documentation of the works and photographic and artistic practices in these years. I think that we could, as we are not so early now, open to any question or comments you have to Elio.
Good evening, I'm here. Thank you for this very rich philosophical take on photography, Elio, and thank you, Katherine, for grounding it in a historical period. There are so many things to ponder upon, but what I really enjoyed, and maybe you can comment back on it, is the fact that somehow contemporary art creates objects that disappear. Photography, the way that Elio does it, has the possibility of rendering something that it's immaterial, which is light, into something that becomes part of, as Elio said, material culture. And not only that, but in a way helps preserve the history of contemporary art, as we cannot preserve it by preserving the objects, because many of them now disappear, they're ephemeral. So I'm not very sure if I get across very well the point, but the light that comes towards your camera in the creation of these material objects that disappear create another material objects, which is your photography, right? Well, that's it.
I don't have much to add what you said. Yeah. Personally, I think that light is basically important as a physical element, not as an expressive one. But the talk here could be really very wide and complicated, because generally speaking, we think that light within an image, which is of course, without light you don't have image, in photographic image at least, but now I think of several images. For instance, I never of course I can see when there is a light, I like it. I like it because it belongs to history of photography. It's a déjà vu. It's a repetition. It's a recognition. But to me, it's not recognition, repetition. To me, is just the work, the action, which is important. So no matter the light is what it is. Generally, the light is terrible. When the artists are working, it's terrible. And so I wouldn't emphasize the aspect of light as an aesthetical element.
But your question is also very provocative because it can be understood on many levels.
Yes.
And of course, the first level is obvious that you have a certain range of works, not all, not all, but a certain range of works which, by definition, were not conceived for being kept, or were extremely fragile and are very difficult to preserve under good conditions. And this is really the easy part of the what happened. The image is keeping the works. But when we would go a little bit further, and of course it's a very paradoxical situation and extremely, eventually polemical, no? That for certain works which have no obvious or no immediate problems of conservation, meaning works which are not immediately degraded and they can be kept under the economical changes I was trying politely to describe, under many changes in terms of visibility, works which are not shown anymore, which are not shown properly, which are banalized, which are close to erased visually. In a way, the photographic image is keeping the meaning and sometimes the spirit of the works. So, it's also extremely tricky, but also extremely important that certain works which are not shown properly, which are badly shown now by certain museums, which are not shown in their entirety for practical reasons, and so on and so forth, works which are, again, completely mistaken because of bad installation. What's kept, it's not the truth, but the meaning is in the, I don't believe in the truth, but I believe in meaning, and sometimes in spirit is in the image. So of course it's a very complex question with there's many layered, I would say.
Yeah. My question is very more profound and not on this high level of art and the spirit and like that. Very profound, simple question, because you speak a little bit from photograph as an archive of I don't know what kind of archive, but in these times of Facebook and especially in Istanbul, all this political situation, that young people have just a smartphone, and maybe it's also a photography, and it's work with light, like all photography is working. But what you mean? It's what kind of archive, and where is the owner, and where is the because we are a little bit on the border of times. Where is a photographer as a person or as an author not really exist, because it's like it's everybody can is a part of like a big software machine. What you think as an art world metaphysical to these profound things? Thanks.
It's for Elio or for me? For both.
Yeah, very, very simple and easy for me. I already said that I'm not, in this moment, concerned with new technologies. I didn't study enough new technology, and I don't have enough data to talk about the possibilities of new technologies, that different way of reproduction of reality. I just start from the point that chemical photography, it's an obsolete way of reproducing reality. That's why I think, I hope, we should preserve all the products that has been realized by that medium, because it's disappearing, only for that, because it's fading away. So why not preserve? So that's archive means also that, means to preserve things. But that's why I emphasize the object, because why do we preserve things? I met a nice, well, very often, a nice woman in Junda. A nice woman in Junda, old lady in Junda. I entered by chance her door, and her house was full of garbage. There was only little cuniculum to pet. So, you see, I think that we should preserve documents because they are tools to study, for studying. And as I said, we need other people's intelligence. So maybe in 2 years, 3 years, I have something to say about a new media of reproduction of reality. I don't have nothing to say about that.
I mean, I could answer from another perspective. I mean, and I understand very well the, in a way, idiosyncrasy of your question to Istanbul, where I don't know well the situation. I mean, I would be more reactive in Beirut or Cairo, where I really know the situation of the photographical archive, sorry. But in a more general way, I would say that it's very difficult for me to accept this kind of very immediate opposition between what Elio calls chemical and or analogical photography and new technologies. Of course, technically, it's absolutely clear, the difference. It's like in cinema. I mean, if you are working 35 and argentique, and if you work with your video, it's a very different story. And I don't know any decent filmmaker who won't make the difference. I remember a long discussion with Pedro Costa, and he told me when, because I said it's very, very strange the way you filmed No Quarto da Wanda, in Wanda's room. And he said yes, because it's it was not 35 anymore, and it's very good for capturing the face, but it's very bad for landscape and distances. So I had to be very close. You know, at least he knew what he was doing, and that's why whether he's filming in 35 or video, the images are thought, articulated, meaningful, consistent. So you know, it's absolutely taking nowhere to have any moralistic or aesthetical position. This is better, or this is good, and this is not. It's not about it. It's about what are we doing, and how do we use the technology. One. Second, I think it's absolutely, and there I would be much more affirmative. I think it's for cultural, historical, and political reasons. It's absolutely necessary to keep archives in countries, and archives of the early images. You know, if you go back again, here I don't know so well, but if you go to Middle East, you know what we are realizing now the last 20 years, looking at the archives and studying the images and so on and so forth, is that this chapter of photography, you know, from the Campagne d'Egypte to the development of photography in the region, was conceived and considered for a long time as a minor chapter, as something not anecdotal, but a chapter, and maybe not the best. And when you look to what happened now, beginning by the fact that the technique were really mise au point, I don't know if in English, were fixed, were really little by little adapted under the terrible sun of Egypt, with all the liquids we were boiling under the tent. You know, it's absolutely part of photography. And after you can enter into more complex issues, which have to do with the way you always you have very complex, sometimes very vicious articulations between a culture, a technology, and an image you want to produce. And on this level, there is one book, I always mention it because I think it's a book which is not so well known, and which is really a jewel in terms of history of photography, which is the book by Christopher Pinney, who is British, who is supposed to be and who is a specialist of Indian photography. But in his book, he did a few other good ones, but this one for me is really absolutely central, called The Coming of Photography in India, it's absolutely amazing with just the titles: photography as a poison, photography as a cure, photography as emancipation. And there you see, the light, the materiality articulating with the opposite, the abstraction of ideas and the abstraction of transformation of a community, which will become soon emancipated through a certain practice and a discussion of the images. So I really think that it's very important, and that there is nothing saying that you can't use your telephone without understanding where images are coming from, even if I could understand that for the young generations, and not me, the young people, when they are really just used to, you have to help, you have to show different kinds of images, but I think it's absolutely crucial to understand what kind of image, what kind of, why this is black and white, why this is erased, why this kind of yellowish paper. I think it's absolutely important, and it's not by coincidence that you have these days a certain number of artists, and of course beginning with young artists, using new technology in a very sophisticated way. And why? Because they know history of images. I could mention, because those who you probably saw this work, for those who visited Documenta, and I think it's on Vimeo now. This, don't remember the title, film realized in Cairo by Hassan Khan with 2 mobile phones, and in a very precise way, using like live events, but performed by actors. And of course, after it's edited, and the speed, the fact that the image is extremely hysterical is taken into consideration, so that the final object is absolutely amazing in terms of what it says about Egyptian body, what the state of the country now, and so on and so forth. It's a very precise work made by somebody who is absolutely aware of that is filming with 2 cell phones. So you see, again, there is nothing moral, and I will never accept people who do, it's better because it was before, or because, it's more a question of trying to understand what we are doing, where we are in terms of image. But again, I can't answer completely, because I'm not aware enough of the situation of archive in the country, and what range of images and how they are circulating. But for me, it's probably a very difficult situation when this preservation and visibility, because I don't believe too much in a selfish preservation, just private, that at certain moment you need the images have to be shared and looked at and discussed and criticized by certain groups of people. So I can understand that the question you are asking has different levels of intensity depending on the place you are trying to answer to it. I hope I was not too confused.
Thank you. I want to start in just saying that I was very happy to see your pictures again. I've been fond of them and of your presence for a long time, both as somebody who has helped some of these artists install works and felt your presence in the room, and as somebody who, as an art historian, has used them to understand better what these objects are. And that's where my question goes, in a way, because your images, if I understand them correctly, look at a very particular relationship between the artist and their work, and the space of exhibition where they're shown, and that moment of installation. There are very few images of artists in their studio making the work, for instance, and there are very few images of the artists without their work. And so I wanted to know if you could speak a little more in detail about what your precise intentions are, what your wishes are when you take these images, about kind of explaining that relationship between the artist, the work, and the space in which they're shown. Because to me, they seem to be suspended to some extent between a straightforward documentation of the process of putting up the work as a kind of knowledge for posterity, what this work looked like, what were the constitutive elements, how it was installed in the room, and so on. But it also does not exclusively focus on the artist and the kind of creative process per se, a way of just emphasizing that there's some kind of magical creative act that is going on that is outside of representation. And so, in a way, your pictures pose a problem, in a way, less so than some other photographs of the same genre. In a way, a Harry Schunk photograph is more easy to understand because you know exactly what it's meant to do in that process. And so I wanted to know if you had a specific interest in what that kind of relationship between these different elements are in the process of taking the picture, or if this is something that comes to you afterwards when you look at the images and decide which ones to show and which ones to keep in the archive.
Thank you. I started to take pictures of art because I didn't know what was a beautiful photograph. And so I thought that maybe the artists, they knew what beauty was. So in a parallel way, I just was wondering what was a masterpiece, why there are so few. And that's why I started to focus not on the institutional image of art, catalog. What is a catalog? It's a book, a catalog, it's a magazine, and so on. So studio. The studio is where the artist is, and so on. So I decided to find a way to be present in that space, in that moment, while the artist would start working. So at the origins of things. At the beginning, and not because I believed that you could catch in the beginning the truth, because I'm not looking for truth. I think that truth doesn't belong to man, so I'm not looking for truth. But I was looking of, as I mentioned, of the relationship between our actions, our products, and the historical moment and place, geography and history. So once you are in that space, and you are in that space with the camera, then you just take a picture. And the most important thing is what you want to do. Of course, I was concentrated in the work, not in the artist much, because for me, if I had to think when I was close to boys, that I was close to boys, for me, that I'm a mythomaniac, I could, stop taking pictures. So when I was close to boys, I wasn't thinking of him at all. He was a human being, working, doing, talking, moving, and I was concentrated in the work. And so I took pictures of the work, of the actions around the work. So maybe you see Joseph Beuys trying to use, I don't know how you call it in English, to make a hole in the ground and take a plant, put it there, shouting at it a bit, smiling, and so I try. Sometimes of course, if you make a document, then you become a little bit a photo reporter, in the sense that you have to catch, I think, the symbols of the space when you are. I am thinking of Castle, Joseph Beuys in Castle. Of course, it was in front of the Fredericianum. Of course, I didn't focus on a man putting a plant in because I could have stayed in Italy and doing it, right? But I tried to see that particular action in that particular space, in that particular moment. That's why I talk about social, economical, and which is very banal, actually, huh? But it is materialistic culture, and it's nothing else by that than that. So I don't know if I answered. So if there is something that catches you somehow for your own reasons, not for my reasons. It's just it's your experience of something. It's not necessarily a connotate which is denotate somehow. I don't know. Maybe it denotates or my connotates. I don't know if because I fill up any kind of image and action I do of meanings, of intentions, but I am also aware of the fact that all these meanings and all these intentions belongs to me, are really private. So it's not so interesting to tell, right? We are not asking to Karl Marx, what did you eat that moment while you were writing the first chapter of the Capital? You just read the Capital, you see. I think, I don't know. I think it's like this. I don't know if I answered it.
Oh. Is that, excuse me, is that me then? Thank you both very much for this most interesting and stimulating conversation. And I think I almost have the answer to this question. It's almost on the tip of my mind, but let me ask anyway. So in the end, would you say that the photograph is more a critique of the object or of the subject? Or at the moment of pushing the button, perhaps, does the subject-object split simply disappear?
But
is that a relevant question?
Yeah, let's start saying that the image belongs to the object.
Okay.
The image belongs to the object. And then I'm a little lost. But can you repeat your question again?
Well, the conversation over the evening seems to have implied that there's a kind of merging or an overlapping of subject and object in the experience of art,
yes.
in the experience of the image or photography or whatever we call
Yes,
it. So it was my question was, well, if you have any strong opinions, either one of you.
No, not strong, but I have an opinion which is which is that the image belongs to the object, and the object becomes pornographically the subject using the camera, because it's it becomes the subject because it is what you are trying to reproduce that makes the action to be reproduced through the reflections of the different quantities of light. I don't know if I answered.
Not entirely. I wonder if Madame David would have an opinion on that.
So what is the question for me, the same? Or the
Yeah, the question is if photography is a critique, is it more a critique of the subject or of the object, or is it just a distraction to make that distinction between subject and object? I mean, at the moment of capturing the image or making the image, because everything goes into subjective decisions, subjective choices, and yet you have something presumably out there. theoretically at least?
Yeah, it's always difficult to separate, but I would say that knowing a certain number of photographers and even more artists, I would say that it really depends. You know, you have very different intentionalities. You know, a certain kind of photographer, I know that he has a certain, I don't know if idea, but interest, attraction or not for the work. And when there is no interest and attraction, I would say you do something else, you know. But and that in certain instances there is a critical act. But if you understand the critical act as interpretation, not necessarily not critique, negative, which is a bad
Yes.
idea of critique, I would say that in many instances, of course, you have a critical attitude of the photographer. It's very, really natural,
sorry.
unless it's a paparazzi, but you know, it's thanks God we don't have that a lot, not enough in museums. In art world, yes, but not always in museums. And unless, you know, it's a very specific category. But when it has to do with a photographer, and again, things changed. So we are not speaking necessarily about today, but a few years ago. There is very often an intentionality, and you know, it's quite interesting when we would go very precisely in identifying Elio's images, other photographers' images, and in each personal work with whom the photographer worked, and not, you would say, of course, a very intentionality. You know, somebody who is interested in Lothar Baumgarten, spending hours on putting together feathers and so on and so forth is maybe not the same photographer who is interested in, I don't know, more different. I think and it's something you could see when we would really take time and work very precisely on hundreds of photography taken between late 50s and late 70s. We would see, of course, and you have intentionalities.
Mm-hmm.
I may add something, not with the aim to clarify, but something which belongs to my experience, direct experience, which is the fact that since I am concentrated in the work, so I listen the image I see of reality, and I try to understand the vocation of the work. So if you understand the vocation of the work, it's the work itself that tells you what to do. So the subject and object, the boundaries are really very, very thin.
Yes,
disappear.
very fluid. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was not so easy to articulate the
Yes.